world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Thursday, February 5th. And we've got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about. Now, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time, I think, talking about the top story I've got today. And that is this TikTok that was released by Kamala Harris HQ. Now, if you haven't seen it, there was a TikTok released by Kamala Harris HQ last night. And it was just an image which looked like somebody trying to log in to Harris HQ, typing in a username and a password. And some of the passwords were quite funny, including like the babysitter is weird and things like that. And then they ultimately got in with the password of headquarters. And this set off a firestorm of people having speculation. Tons of people making comments about what it was. Now, my initial thought about what this was, I'm like, we have to wait and see. I was trying not to get my hopes up, hoping that it wasn't something, groundbreaking, or that it was some, I didn't want to be disappointed by overthinking about what this announcement could be, but it could have been anything coming out of the Harris campaign. Now, a few things I knew right off the bat that it was not going to be. I assumed it was not going to be a 2028 presidential bid announcement. We are far too early for 2028 presidential bids being announced. You may remember Donald Trump tried to announce his bid for 2024 prior to the midterms in 2022. And the RNC told him then, basically, if you announce this early, we will not back you. It was one of the few times that they had any sort of a backbone when it came to Donald Trump. Yet, he ended up ultimately announcing ahead or just after the midterms, basically just, rubbing their nose in it, saying, I can do whatever I want. I mean, that's typical Donald Trump. It is too early for there to be a 2028 announcement. I think anybody who peaks this early trying to be the nominee is setting themselves up for failure. Now, a few of the other things I knew it wouldn't be, and these were all things that I saw people in comment sections talking about. They were talking about the idea that it was going to be Kamala Harris announcing that she had the evidence and that she was going to prove that Donald Trump stole the 2024 election, and that it was going to lead to Donald Trump being ousted and she being installed as the rightful winner. I knew that wasn't going to happen either. Then I saw some other comments in there that I'm going to touch on in a little bit, but one of them was that she is going to be either running for a Senate seat, running for a House seat, something like that. There was also another one that she was going to become the Speaker of the House next Congress after the midterms. And I'm going to break down why I don't think that was going to happen. First of all, in order for her to be Speaker of the House, more than likely she would have to be a member of the House of Representatives, which would mean she would have to run for a House seat. Now, so far, she has not announced a candidacy for any House seat. Last time she came out talking about anything related to running, she said she wasn't running right now, and she is going to spend all of her efforts trying to help other Democrats get elected. Okay. So this whole Harris HQ thing comes out. and she's trying to, uh, I know looking at it, I've got a good idea of what it probably is. I figured it had something to do with getting Democrats elected in the midterms. But people were going crazy talking about, oh man, I'm so excited. Oh, she's finally got the proof. Oh, they're doing this. Oh, they're doing that. Well, let's talk about if she did have proof of um, some kind of election fraud coming out of the Trump campaign for 2024. It would not change anything. Now, she might not have had the evidence at the time, but the only time in which that evidence would have been relevant and could have changed the result of the election would have been ahead of the certification of the results, both by the states in December. I think the December, I want to say it's like December 6th, December 12th, something like that. Um, there's a date in December where every state must have their electoral votes certified. And then also by January 6th, when the federal government, when Congress meets in the proceeding that she herself sat through and oversaw, um, they would have had the evidence out and pushed through. Once Congress certified the election, that is it. There is no mechanism for any sort of overturning of the election. And even if she had the evidence now, there is nothing that could be done. There is no mechanism that a court could look at and say, okay, uh, Vice President Harris, we agree with you. You should have won. You were the rightful winner. Um, you get to take over the rest of the term. It doesn't happen. The only ways Donald Trump can be removed are basically three: impeachment, 25th Amendment, where he is physically, mentally unwell and not able to complete his term, and Congress agrees and removes him, or if he passes away, if he dies. That's it. At this point, those are the only options. Even if a court was willing to entertain listening to this, at best, all they could do would be remove Donald Trump, and JD Vance would still become president. Um, it's just not a thing. Okay. Now, everybody, I know why people were getting so hopeful over this. They were getting really excited, and they were saying things like, "Oh, finally, she's gonna come in and she's gonna do something." This explains why they haven't done anything yet, and why they've let everything run the way it's ran. No, they let it run because they didn't have a choice, and Democrats haven't had any power since January 3rd, 2025. They won't have any power again until after the midterms if we give them control of the House and the Senate back. But people are scared and they're desperate and they want to cling on to any amount of hope. But we're sounding like MAGA by saying, "Oh, this is going to happen," and "Oh, we're going to finally prove that something bad happened." I would love to see if there is evidence. I would love to see it. The biggest thing that could come out from them having any sort of evidence that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and others rigged the election would be to prevent it from happening again. That would be the big thing. Now, as far as it all goes, Donald Trump is going to continue to be the president. That was not what the announcement was. As far as her making a 2028 run, way too early. She did not do that. We are way too early when we are looking at 28. We have tons of uh, people who are eligible to run, who could run. I don't know that we need Kamala Harris as much as I think she would make a great president. I don't know if she is even going to attempt to run again. We're not going to really start looking at 2028 frontrunners until people start announcing their candidacy somewhere around summer 2027. And then it's going to be things that we're going to start weeding them out, uh, and there are going to be debates and things like that up until we start primary season 2028, which would probably get kicked off about this time in 2028, around February with the Iowa caucuses. Um, and then We go from there and we move forward. Okay. Now, if Kamala Harris throws her name in the hat at that point, then we deal with it and we see if she gets the votes. Now, ideally, being the last sitting president or vice president for our party, that she would potentially be the standard bearer. However, because she did lose in 2024, there is a good chance that somebody else steps in to fill that role. But again, we are way too early to be looking at front runners. We have a lot to focus on between here and there, including the midterms. Midterms and state and local elections are coming. Okay, we've got caucuses, we've got other things going on, and we are going to have to deal with the fallout of those as we start gearing up for the 2026 midterm elections in November that are now just about, what would it be, 9 months away? And for as long as this year has felt already, it's only about 5 weeks old, but it feels like we've been in 2026 for 6 months. That time, as we get into summer and it warms up, and we're out being busier, that time is going to fly. So we have to be ready for the midterms. And one other thing before I get into what her real announcement was something else I saw. And again, this isn't the first time I've had to address this, but I'm going to address it again. This was somebody in the comments of multiple videos, and it was multiple people that were making this. Well, if she does run, we'll see if she could actually win a primary, because I want there to actually be a primary this time. We've talked about it before. I'm going to talk about it again. There is, and there was a 2024 Democratic primary. Okay, there was. Joe Biden got like 97% of the delegates. And by extension, so did Kamala Harris. Because when you voted for Joe Biden in the primary, and most Democrats I know probably didn't even bother going to vote in the primary because they thought it was a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee. But he did have two primary challengers, RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson. Now, early on, it was very obvious that RFK Jr. was not going to beat Joe Biden. That's when he dropped out, tried to run as an independent. He was a spoiler candidate. It was supposed to be another option between the two old white men, and that he could pull votes that from people who did not like Donald Trump, but could not bring themselves to vote for Joe Biden or didn't want to if there was an option. That was the whole reason RFK Jr. became an independent. And then ultimately, when Joe Biden dropped out and Kamala Harris took over, RFK Jr. ended up deciding to endorse Donald Trump in exchange for his current position as the head of Health and Human Services. Now, all of that being said, there was a primary, okay? And just because the Democrats didn't announce it, there was still primary elections, there were still winners. It still happened. But where people get pissed off is that when Joe Biden stepped aside, he stepped aside in, I believe it was June, at the very end of June or middle of June, somewhere in June anyway, of 2024. They had about 10 days to 2 weeks to come up with a new nominee. Okay. And the reason being, Republicans were already playing fucking games. Certain states have eligibility rules, and you had to have your paperwork in saying you were the party nominee by certain dates. Now, in the past, uh, both Republican and Democratic led states would grant exceptions if your party convention was happening after the deadline, and they would let you wait until after you had the convention. This time in 2024, Republican states, because of Donald Trump and because everything going on with Joe Biden, and because they knew it was going to be a contentious race and they were worried about losing, and because that's what Republicans do. They like to change the rules and they like to make things difficult, but they want the same leeway that they've always gotten, right? That's what they wanted. Well, they said, okay, you've got until I think it was January or July 10th, I think, or there was a date in July anyway, that they had to have their pick in. The Democrats had to say this was going to be who was on the ballot. They did not have the dates on the calendar left to attempt another election, another primary. To organize anything like that was going to be impossible. Okay, and they were talking about, well, should we have a contested primary or could we have a contested at a convention where we have everybody try to come up with it? And the answer to that was no. Why? Because certain states were saying you had to have your pick in. They had to unify behind somebody. The obvious answer was Kamala Harris. She was the one who was next in line to run. I have said this before and I'm going to say it again. What Joe Biden should have done that day is he should have said, okay, in a week, I am resigning. I will be done in a week. I'm going to be done in 10 days, whatever that date was. And he should have stepped aside, let Kamala Harris become the VP or go from VP to president. They could have planned a quick inauguration. They could have done all of the pomp, all of the circumstance, and been done with all of it. And then there wouldn't have been this fear of, well, we've never had a woman president before. She would have been the president. That would have taken and alleviated some of the stress. And she would have been campaigning as the incumbent. That would have made a difference. But beyond that, I think it would have softened the blow for certain people who were upset about everything that happened. Okay. There wouldn't have been the need to talk about primary because now she is the incumbent president. They can say, well, yeah, it makes sense that there's no primary. She's the incumbent. It would have solved some problems. The other reason why there was no primary is because, beyond all of that, one of the other reasons why it made sense as to her being the nominee, Joe Biden had already amassed a sizable amount of campaign funds. I think it was in the neighborhood of several $100 million, if I remember correctly. It was a quite large campaign fund, but it was for the Biden Harris campaign, which, when Joe Biden stepped aside, it opened the accessibility to her to run on that money. She could use that funds to do what she needed to do. If she wouldn't have been the nominee, if it had been Gavin Newsom or if it had been Shapiro or Andy Bashir or anybody else that people were talking about, including Bernie Sanders, they would not have been able to transfer that money to her campaign, not easily, because there are campaign finance laws. They would have had to convert it to a PAC and spent the money through a PAC or something like that. This was different. This was the best option. So for those people who are saying, well, at least there'd be a primary this time, there's going to be a primary in 2028, just like there was a primary in 2024. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves and we are talking about the 28 midterm or 2028 general primary, let's talk about the midterm primary. Right now, we are starting the midterm primary. Now, as we're in the primary season, now is the time. If you have a favored candidate, you must go out, push for them, do everything you can to have them win the primary. Okay? Fight like hell to get your preferred candidate. But then afterward, if they lose the primary, for your state rep, for your House of Representatives on the national level, for your senator, whatever the case, whatever uh, battle we are dealing with, whatever election we are talking about. Hell, maybe it's for governor in your state because there's a lot of governor races. I think it's like 36 or 38 that are up for election this time. Fight for your preferred candidate. And then afterward, we need to coalesce behind whoever the Democrats put forward. I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, we shouldn't vote blue no matter who. Here's the thing, almost every Democrat is better than every Republican right now, period. Okay. We need to go ahead and get uh, our shit together. We need to vote together, and we need to worry about getting this regime under control, putting some checks and balances back in, having the Democrats be in control of Congress, and then we can worry about fixing things with the Democratic Party on the national level. All right, now let's get back to what her actual announcement was. Now, Kamala Harris made the announcement that she is turning Harris HQ into what she is calling headquarters. This is going to be a one stop place where we can all get together. There are going to be links to party leadership, um, Democratic uh, people running for varying offices are going to be able to be there, um, answering questions through I'm guessing forums and things like that. Um, they're going to have videos up and talking about what is all going on. There's also going to be links to community leaders and religious leaders and things like that. Now, this could be things like leadership for different groups, like the ACLU and other places like that. Um, Different community-based groups throughout the country, and it's just going to supposed to be a place where we can come together and get connected to other people, but also be connected to resources to help us out. And I think it's a good idea. Now, a while back, Kamala Harris had said she did not plan to run for a future office in the near future. This was when asked about running for governor of California. There was a lot of speculation that she would attempt to run for governor and use a successful governor's bid in effort to launch her back into the national spotlight to run for 28. She chose not to. She had said that she was going to end up running or helping Democrats get elected in the midterms. That was her focus. And I think that's part of what she is trying to do. I said when she made that announcement a while back that she is going to probably be using the midterms as a launching point. If she goes in and she's putting up a bunch of support and she's helping here, helping there, if she goes to campaign, let's say here in Iowa, right? Let's say, and I'm going to use Iowa's fourth district. Iowa's fourth district has been red since back in the days when Iowa had five districts, and Iowa's five was very red. I believe there has been a Republican representing certain parts of either Iowa four or Iowa five, depending on how far back you want to go with it, longer than I have been alive. Now, let's say she comes to Iowa in support of whoever ends up being the nominee for that district. And let's say it works. Okay. She helps that person across the line. And the Democrat wins in a district that is normally not very well perceived. And she does this repeatedly across, you know, numerous districts. She may use that as okay, my endorsement is helping as a launch pad to see that, and judging from reactions from crowds as she's out in front of them, as she's speaking, if she goes out and she's speaking in favor of a candidate for, say, Iowa's fourth district, and it's met with very flat reaction, And that happens repeatedly. Maybe she decides not to run for president in 2024 or 2028, rather. Now, as we are looking at 28, we are gearing up for this big, uh, we got the midterms coming up, and then we're also looking ahead toward the Democrats having a chance to run. So she's going to be looking at a lot of things and looking at how she's perceived around the country. What is the general consensus? And just everything, step by step by step. Okay. And that's a good thing. Now, I know a lot of people were disappointed that her announcement was not some big thing of her returning to politics, that it wasn't some way out of this current mess and removing Donald Trump. I saw some comments afterward after she had made her announcement saying things like, well, this could have been an email. You're right, it could have been. But the thing is, people let their imagination get away from them, and they were the ones pushing all of their expectations and their fears and their hopes, hoping that this would be something big that would come out to save them. We've got a lot of work to do here in this country. Don't get me wrong. We've got a lot of things to fix. We've got a lot of things to do to right the ship. And hanging our hope on one candidate is not necessarily the right way to go. Beyond that, we don't know if Kamala Harris is even going to enter the 2028 presidential race. There are so many people that are eligible that could be huge names when it comes to uh, the presidential race in 2028. It's going to be a different world then. Okay. In part, we got the baby boomers passing away. They're dying off. And by 2028, the largest combined voting bloc is going to be millennials and Gen Z, which would be effectively, they say millennial starts uh, somewhere between or somewhere around 1980. So by 2028, the eldest millennials will be 48. Everybody roughly 48 or younger will be considered a millennial now, or a Gen Z, or even Gen Alpha. And they're going to be the biggest voting bloc, combined voting bloc, right? The younger people that have been affected by this economy. And what I think is going to happen is it's going to change how things go. I'm thinking that whoever may be the Democratic nominee come 28 might be somebody we've never talked about. We've got our eye on right now as potential people to watch: Kamala Harris, Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker out of Illinois, Shapiro out of Pennsylvania, Andy Beshear out of Kentucky, Roy Cooper out of North Carolina, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. You have John Ossoff in Georgia. However, Georgia losing him out of the Senate would be a big loss, considering we may only have the Senate by enough seats to hold a majority. That would be potentially a bad move. A few of the other names, I've heard floating around: Pete Buttigieg, Jasmine Crockett. Um, and I hate to say it, I don't know if Jasmine Crockett would be the right person. Not because she couldn't do the job or wouldn't make an amazing president, but I think Democrats are going to be a little gun shy come 28, and they're going to be afraid of making the same mistakes they made in 2024, and that they are going to probably go back to what they consider the safe pick and pick a white guy. Um, but there's such a deep bench for the Democrats that I am convinced that they're going to have no problem coming up with a nominee. We don't have to get stuck behind it just being Kamala Harris. And in fact, there could be somebody that we haven't even talked about um, that comes up and surprises us, right? Maybe there is somebody in uh, a district that is running uh, that we hadn't thought of, right? You have got maybe Graham Plattner, the Democrat in Maine, for example. If he comes up and outs Susan Collins, maybe that brings him up and brings his notoriety up to where people are now starting to talk about him. Or maybe it is whoever the Democratic governor of Iowa ends up being, because I'm firmly convinced Iowa is going to go blue in the governor's office after the midterms. I mean, there could be any number of people. The Democrats have so many options, it's not funny. Whereas, look at the Republican Party. Right now, they are setting up a battlefield. Donald Trump refuses to endorse anybody yet. There's multiple reasons for that. One, Donald Trump knows the minute he endorses somebody, he's a lame duck. Okay. He wants to keep playing this will I, won't I, can I, can't I bullshit game of I might run for a third term. And he's going to do that for as long as he can until they finally say, okay, Mr. President, no, you can't do that. You are not eligible to run for a third term. You need to endorse somebody. They are going to keep pushing him. He is going to keep pushing it until he has to make an endorsement. He was asked between Marco Rubio and JD Vance who he would endorse, and he said they're both fine, they're both great. Now, he tried to say the Republicans have a deep bench, but so far, some of the names that have been brought up as possible candidates for the Republicans instead of Donald Trump have been either Eric or Don Trump Jr., I should say. They have talking about J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, talking about Steve Bannon, that greaseball motherfucker, wanting to run. Ted Cruz wanting to run. Now I don't remember. I think it was Senator Al Franken, but I could be wrong. There was a senator at one point was talking about a third person and said, "Yeah, I like that guy about as much as I like Ted Cruz, and I hate Ted Cruz." Ted Cruz is hated in the Senate. He's despised. I don't even know if he's that well liked in the state of Texas. He keeps winning because he has the right letter next to his name. Doesn't mean they like him. But they don't have a standout stellar pick, not right now. And Donald Trump is playing these games trying to say, well, I don't know if I'm going to end up endorsing anybody. He's trying to keep himself relevant because he knows the end is getting closer. He doesn't want it to stop. He wants to keep all eyes on him, and he's trying to figure out a way that he can convince a court that he is eligible for a third term. Now, he is not. The 22nd Amendment is very, very clear. It says no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, unless they had been uh, up, moved up to president to fill in the remainder of somebody else's term, and then they can serve no more than 10 years. So that means if something happens to Donald Trump before the end of January 20th, 2027, and JD Vance has to become president, that would mean that he would only be eligible for one additional term. If it is after January 20th, 2027, then JD Vance could run theoretically for two additional. However, I don't see any realm of possibility in which the Democrats lose the next election for president unless either A, Donald Trump goes away and JD Vance finds a way to work with Democrats or even with Republicans and they flip their stances on a lot of things and they greatly fix everything, which I don't see happening. I really can convince that the Democrats are going to win in 2028. Now, beyond that, Donald Trump is not wanting to give up this kingmaker, appointment picker type power. That's who he is. That's what he wants. He wants the authority to make those decisions. Period. Um, Now, speaking of Donald Trump, he was at the national prayer dinner or prayer breakfast, I guess it was, uh, earlier this morning when he was talking about the 2020 election and why they are digging into the 2020 election. Now, he said some things in there. He says he won the 2020 election, but that's not all. That's not all. He said he had to win it for his ego. That is one of the truest statements Donald Trump has ever said in his life. Donald Trump admitted that a lot of things that he's got, it has to do with his ego. That the only reason he wants to still prove that he won 2020 was so that he can prove he's not a loser. Now, he went on to say in there that the Democrats, when they introduce him places and stuff, they say, well, he won the electoral college, but he didn't win the popular vote. He's the president, Donald Trump, things like that. That doesn't happen. It does in his mind because of his ego. He gets introduced somewhere, let's just say by a Democrat. In his mind, they could say, I want to introduce the 47th president of the United States, Donald Trump. That's all the Democrats said. What Donald Trump hears because of his ego, I firmly believe, is something about like what he said at this prayer dinner or prayer breakfast. Is that this is the 47th president of the United States who won the electoral college, but really didn't win the popular vote. It's Donald Trump, kind of thing. He genuinely believes that they insult him when they introduce him, and they don't. Not typically. Now they insult him when they're rallying against him, when they talk about him, like when Kamala Harris and others were campaigning, they said no, he didn't win the popular vote in 2016 or 2020, which is true. But see, in his mind, he can't accept that being true because he is convinced everybody should love him the way he loves himself. That is just how he is. So he makes up these things in his head that don't actually happen. I don't know if it is the dementia. I don't know if it is just his ego or what. But that's part of what is going on with Donald Trump. Now, they are looking into the 2020 election again down in Georgia. And apparently, there is now a countersuit by Fulton County against this administration for the return of all of the ballots, etc., that was claimed in this raid, in this search of Fulton County. Now, Donald Trump says he had every right to do it because he is the president and because it is his DOJ, that they have every right to be used as his personal attorneys, and they don't. Now, this search warrant was looking for some proof of fraud in the 2020 uh, general election, this election that happened 6 years ago. And like what I was talking about earlier with Kamala Harris coming out and saying, well, see, I proved fraud. I actually won. You should install me as president. Same thing. There is no mechanism to retroactively go back and say, well, Donald Trump should have been president, so everything Joe Biden did gets canceled. It doesn't work that way. And but Donald Trump is hoping to end up proving something because he needs it. He needs it for his ego. He needs to be able to be vindicated and show that, well, see, I really want people really love me. That's what he needs, right? He can't accept the fact that there may be people in this world that don't like him. And that idea is something that has never ever crossed his mind. Now, we talked a little bit about the midterms earlier. Donald Trump he was being interviewed on NBC Nightly News with, is it Tom Lamas? Um, Anyway, he was being interviewed and was asked about whether or not he would accept the 2026 midterm election results. And Donald Trump said he would only accept them if they were honest. Now, what does he mean by that? Well, he is laying the groundwork for what Donald Trump has always done. He is already saying that there's going to be a way when I'm not going to accept them. I'm not going to believe that they're real if they're not honest. Well, what would not be honest to Donald Trump? Simple. If he loses the midterms, that is what he's setting up for. Donald Trump is gearing up for this idea that they are going to lose the midterms, and he's already setting up his excuses. Well, clearly there was something going on. We need to investigate that. He's going to try to use every bit of power from the federal government to strong arm uh, counties and districts and things like that to switch the votes, basically to say, well, yeah, you actually won this district, the Republican won that one, but we were wrong over here. This goes hand in hand with things that, like what Steve Bannon was saying the other day, when he tried to say that they are going to put ICE agents um, at every polling place. It's just not going to happen. It's impossible. There are too many polling places, not enough ICE agents, and if the voter turnout is high enough, there isn't anything they can do about it. But see, Donald Trump doesn't want to deal with any of that, right? He wants to set up his scapegoat. He wants to set up his talking point so it looks like he only lost because of some effect caused by Democrats and cheating. Now, of course, his supporters are going to eat that up, and you'll see things in the comments. Well, Democrats only always cheat and things like that, and that, of course, is not true. But that won't stop Donald Trump. It never has. You see, Donald Trump has always tried to say, "Well, the only way I could lose is if it's rigged against me." He said it in 2016 in the Iowa caucuses. He lost the Iowa caucuses to Ted Cruz. What did he say? Well, they were rigged against me. Going into 2016, when he was running up against Hillary, what did he say? Well, the only way I could lose 2016 elections is if they cheat and if they were rigged against me. Goes into 2020. He loses to Joe Biden. What does he say? Oh, they were rigged. They cheated. They did this. Yet 60 plus court cases, and they could never prove any amount of cheating. But see, that's what happens with Donald Trump. And then his whole campaign in 2024, he kept saying, we got to make it too big to rig, too big to rig. They're not going to be able to steal this one too. Donald Trump is trying to lay the groundwork for his claims as to why he didn't lose the midterms. Now, he's terrified of losing the midterms. Why? Well, because when they lose those midterms, there's a good chance the House would be Democratic, that they may also have a Democratic controlled Senate, and Donald Trump will get nothing else passed. He is going to have to work with Democrats in order to govern. And about the only thing that is going to get passed and signed into law in that time frame is going to be anything related to funding the government. It's going to be very basic funding packages. I don't expect the Democrats to put up a lot of fight trying to keep an increased funding. It's going to be probably just continuing resolution after continuing resolution, but that is still a better outcome than letting the Republicans have control and them somehow being able to uh, push through another reconciliation bill or bigger tax cuts to the wealthy or something like that. Donald Trump is terrified of the midterms, but he should also be terrified of the remainder of the year. Now, there is a special election coming up in March, a little over a month away, for Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat in Georgia. Now, that seat is very safe Republican, or you would think. Okay. Now, from what I am hearing from being on other live groups and things like that, that there is something like 23 people running to fill that seat. Now, 23 people is a lot. And apparently, there's no primary. Um, there is just going to be this special election. Now, what I don't know is if Georgia is a 50 plus one state. I think they are because of the fact that uh, was it Raphael Warnock, I think, or maybe it was John Ossoff, one of the two. They had to uh, they won their election but didn't cross the 50% threshold and then had to run in a runoff election a second time. So I think they are a state that requires a runoff if you don't get 50% of the vote. So what would that mean? Well, you have 23 candidates. I'm hearing that only 3 of them are Democrats. So potentially you could end up, depending on how far and how wide the Republican vote is split, you could end up with a situation like what they had over the last weekend in Texas, in the state, not the state, in the House representative seat, where it was a runoff election, but because it was the top 2 vote getters, it was 2 Democrats running. It was guaranteed one or the other was going to win. And that's potentially what could happen in Georgia in this seat to fill Marjorie Taylor Greene's seat, is that it could end up going to a runoff. I almost guarantee you, with 23 entrants for that seat, that it is going to take a runoff. But if you have, and I'm gonna make it simple math, okay? If you have 10,000 voters in that pool, okay, for that district, and if only 30% of them are Democrat, okay, let's just even split it evenly, 15 and 15 across both Democratic candidates. Now they both get, 15% of the vote each. Okay, cool. But you have 20 Republicans, and they split that remaining 70K vote. Well, now you are looking at about 3,500 per Republican on the ballot. Well, but you were staring at 15 or 1,000 for each of the Democrats. They would be too widely separated in order for them to even coalesce and make, have a fighting chance. So what we're talking about here is, depending on how the votes work in this special election and how they break down, when you're talking 23 people in a race, you could lead to a runoff where it is 2 Democrats. Now, beyond that, you have a seat in uh, New Jersey, the seat for Mickey Sherrill. That seat is going to probably be a safe Democratic pickup. All right, now you are at 216 Dems to 218 Republicans. We have 30 Republicans in the House of Representatives who have said, no, I am not seeking re-election. All it would take is 1 or 2 of them, because they have nothing else to lose, being fed up and sick of this administration and saying, fuck it, we need to put the adults back in charge. I'm switching parties. Now, it's a long shot. Don't get me wrong. That is a very long shot when it comes to doing anything. But simple fact of the matter is, they may they may be looking ahead, trying to save their party down the road and saying, well, if I convert to Democrat for at least a little bit, put them back in charge till I'm done, after I'm out of office, I can revert back to being a Republican and lay low for a little bit, let the Republicans reinvent themselves and come back. Sounds crazy, but it's possible. So as they're staring at it, they should be worried about not just losing the midterms and losing the House in the midterms. They could lose the House in between. It wouldn't take a whole lot. Mike Johnson is working on the thinnest majority of uh, any House of Representatives ever. And he's been awful quiet. I think because he's afraid of getting a motion to vacate. It would not take very many Republicans. I think it's like 5 Republicans at this point, or something like that, is what it would take to vote to remove him as Speaker of the House. Here's the thing, because of the margins, it would take those 5 Republicans and almost all Democrats. In fact, like 2 Democrats, I think, could actually sit out the vote and not vote with the Republicans right now and still pass it, and Mike Johnson would be out of a job. And Republicans, if they don't have a speaker, one, the House of Representatives grinds to a fucking halt. They can't do a damn thing. But beyond that, if they are only sitting at 218 votes, they have exactly enough to elect a speaker. It could go 30, 40, 50 votes before they have a Speaker of the House. And the whole time, while there is no speaker, nothing is getting done, nothing is getting accomplished. So they're worried about what could happen when it comes to any of this. They should be seriously looking at it going, what's coming next? How can we get ahead of it? How can we make things better? And they can't. The only way they can get ahead of it would be to get rid of Donald Trump. And they're not ready to make that play. I don't think they make that move potentially until after June or July, where it is a lot closer to the midterm elections. And they hope that by doing so, they would get the voting base in their back pocket, trying to get them to uh, go along with it and trying to not have those deep losses that we are looking at. I mean, when you are talking about, like in that special election in Texas, where Democrats flipped a uh, Donald Trump by 22% seat, and they flipped it with like a 5 or 6% margin, I think, maybe even more. You're talking almost a 30 percentage point swing. There are so many races in this country that were decided by less than 30 percentage points. It is not funny. And the simple fact of the matter is, Republicans should be worried that they could end up getting completely and totally obliterated. So they may be looking at the clock going, okay, how close to the election can we get rid of Donald Trump? And is it going to save us with voters in the midterms? Now, that also depends as to what ends up coming out with the Epstein files. At the end of the month, we are dealing with Bill and Hillary Clinton, both going to be testifying on separate days. It sounds like it is going to potentially be public and televised, which again could be bad, could be very bad for Donald Trump. At this point, there's not much left that the Republicans can do to Bill or Hillary Clinton short of prosecuting them. And that wouldn't be the end of the world. But see, they think that we worship our politicians like they do, like they worship Trump, and that's just not the case. So they're watching to see what they can do with Donald Trump. And we are going to be paying attention to the midterms and the primary races, etc., as we go forward, so that we can get the ball rolling. And if we can reclaim at least one of the chambers of Congress, we can put some safeguards back in place and prevent things that this administration wants to do. All right, that is going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I'm looking at doing a TikTok live later tonight. I think that is going to end up probably being a bonus podcast for tomorrow. I think I'm also going to do a regular podcast. So be watching for that. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you have a great day, and I will catch you again tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.